Hey guys, Brian Schoaf here for BombasticEntertainment.com. With Halloween right around the corner, I thought it'd be a good time to take a long overdue look at how I created the stop-motion puppet for our interactive creature feature, It Came From the Garage. So if you haven't seen that, check it out here. While this isn't meant to be an in-depth tutorial, there's still a lot of great info about what goes into making a foam latex puppet and creating a stop-motion animation movie. Now we got a lot of ground to cover, so without further to-dos, let's jump right into it. Every puppet begins with an idea, and to bring that idea to life, oftentimes a drawing will help. You also have to think about how the puppet is going to be molded, so you can't create freely. I sculpted my puppet in as flat a position as I could so I could run a two-piece mold later. Since my creature was the product of a mad scientist using fingers to make a tiny little spider, I cast my own fingers using alginate and duplicated them with Cal 30, which is an industrial strength plaster. Those were glued onto a piece of wood which would serve as the base of my sculpture. To sculpt the creature, I used monster clay from themonstermakers.com. I'd never used it before, and I was pretty impressed at how easy it was to work with. It's also reusable. I knew I'd be adding an acrylic eyeball later, so I made a relief directly in the sculpture so the tooling would carry over to the finished puppet. Now, this mold isn't going to win any beauty awards, and I only made it this way because I was running out of materials to do it the right way, and I didn't have time to wait for the UPS guy. But, presentation aside, a mold doesn't have to look pretty, it just has to work. American Scientific did an entire issue on it. I didn't have enough clay to make the second half of the mold, so my workaround was to suspend the sculpture inside the retaining walls and carefully pour in the exact amount of silicone, letting gravity create the dividing line. I had to get creative to compensate for my lack of materials, so again, while this worked, I don't recommend you try this. At all. Don't do it. You'll end up with a sloppy mold seam, and while this can be fixed, you're really just causing more work for yourself further down the road. I'll continue the research. Next, I needed to make a mother mold. A mother mold is a hard shell that'll help softer molds, like those made out of silicone, hold their shape as you're working with them while they're being cast so that nothing shifts around. That was made out of Cal 30. Now, if parts of my puppet weren't made from plaster, I would have just made the whole thing from Cal. The thing is that Cal or gypsum molds seem to work a little better for foam latex projects since the surface of plaster gives the liquid foam something to grip onto. But silicone also works too, so it's really a matter of deciding what material is right before you mold your sculpture. And as bad as my mold was, it worked well enough in the end. I got 5 castings out of it, and my sculpture survived demolding, so all things considered, what should have been a disaster ended up working just fine. With the mold done, I designed an armature to fit inside. An armature is what allows the puppet to be made posable and maintains its shape as it's being animated. I made mine out of 16-gauge aluminum wire. Now, a common problem with wire armatures is that eventually they break, and once they break, you pretty much have to make a new puppet. To increase my puppet's lifespan, I doubled over the wire to help relieve some of the strain, and then wound that into a braid using a power drill. I superglued this onto a popsicle stick and used plumber's epoxy to secure that into place. Since stop-motion puppets have trouble standing while they're being animated, I made a base that kept my little finger puppet upright, which was then painted green so it could be keyed out later in post. Using more plumber's epoxy, I secured a nut that would thread the base to the armature. Into the nut, I put a screw to act as a placeholder to keep the foam out so that after baking, I could cut into my puppet, remove it, and easily find the thread again. For the final touch, I added 2 pieces of very thin wire. This light wire kept the armature afloat in my mold, guaranteeing it would always be in the middle of my puppet and not sink into the foam as it was liquid or shift around as the foam latex sets up. Later, it was clipped off with wire cutters and removed after the foam had been baked. Making foam latex can seem intimidating, but in reality, if you can bake a cake, you can run foam. Just don't try to put it in your mom's food mixer. Foam latex is toxic, so once you run foam in a mixer, that's all it's ever going to be used for. Don't risk your health by trying to be cheap. You really need to buy one for this special purpose. Now, I wish I could give you some tips for mixing, but the process is literally different for everyone. Even if you follow the directions that came with your foam latex kit to the absolute T, things like room temperature and changes in humidity can ruin an otherwise textbook foam run. Just follow the directions that came with your kit, take notes, and adjust your mixing schedule for what gives you the best results. Look, I'm going to Google it. I'll call you back. Now, before the foam was run, I brushed some release agent into the mold because I knew I wouldn't have time to do it later. After I filled both mold halves with foam latex, I placed the armature in the mold and quickly but carefully flipped it closed. Remember what I said about needing a mixer for the sole purpose of making foam? The same goes true for baking. I use one of those portable turkey roasters. Don't cook this stuff in your home oven. You'll ruin it and run the risk of making yourself sick. Once the oven's preheated, all that's left is to put your mold in and go take a break for a few hours while it bakes. With the foam cooked to full cure, I like to wrap my mold in towels, especially if it's a plaster or a gypsum mold. I was casting this outside in the winter, and bringing hot plaster in from the cold air can cause the mold to shock. Mold shock just means that a plaster mold can crack from the shock of the sudden change in temperature. So wrapping it in towels is a good way to insulate the plaster and avoid that. It also helps the mold cool gradually down to room temperature, so it's a good idea even if you're working in the summertime. I always find the process of demolding to be a little bit nerve-wracking because you never know if all your hard work is paid off until you get the mold open. As you can see here, I had quite a bit of flashing around the puppet due to excess material, but that's perfectly normal with the two-piece mold. Overall, this casting was very successful and a big relief because the hard part's over. For me, seaming and finishing is the most relaxing part of the process because for the first time since the sculpting phase, you're not under the gun time-wise. You can just put on some music, take some time, and fix any problems with your puppet. The first thing is getting rid of the flashing. I like to use cuticle scissors because I think they do a little bit of a better job, but in reality, you can use whatever works for you. Just remember, you can't put it back once it's gone. So just take your time and be patient, and you can always trim around it a second time if you need. With the flashing gone, I used a thickened Prozaid cream to finish the seam and patch any holes made from trapped air bubbles. For the paint, I applied the base colors using latex mask paints I also got from Monster Makers, and airbrushed the highlights on. Once everything was dry, I hit the puppet with a coat of neutral set powder to keep it from being tacky, and also to make it easier to handle while animating. Now I pop in the eye and we have Making the movie was an interesting experience. Basically, we had a 2-day shoot to get all the stuff with just my character, and then for all the stuff where it was me and the puppet, I was a one-man band. Stop motion is the process of animating a puppet one frame at a time. I used a remote control to take the shots so my hands never disturbed the camera after the shot was set up. Shooting the movie with a DSLR definitely helped since a big chunk of the film is comprised of still frames. For the shots where I was in the frame with the puppet, I'd shoot my part first, then animate the puppet and composite the two shots together in post. Overall, it was a lot of hard work, but a fun process. I developed a pretty good working rhythm, and by the end, the average stop-motion shot only took about 45 minutes. Outside shots were animated against green screen since I couldn't control the light outside, especially by the street since you never knew when a car would drive by and change the light. So that's it. I know it seems kind of overwhelming, but I like to think nothing worth doing is easy. And at the end of the day, I think it's all up there on the screen in the finished product where it matters. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below or hit me up on Twitter. And don't forget to check out bombasticentertainment.com to see what we're up to. Happy Halloween.